Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Maui, Hawaii, United States of America, here on our planet Earth. Welcome back to the Maui Series of talks. This is the 7th talk. Honored to be in your company, wherever you may be in the world today. A short, spontaneous talk that's come up about the concept and instinct for freedom. I'll explain that in a second. And the challenge, the deeply challenging choice-making capacity of consciousness and living with that level of navigation between destiny, instinct, and choice. If you can hang out there with me for a little bit, I'd like to play in that shared space and try to offer some personal insight from my own life and struggles. And perhaps there's some value there for you if you so choose. Now, the concept of an instinct for freedom is not mine. It's Professor Noam Chomsky's. I did title a book based upon his phrase, Instinct for Freedom, back in 2003. Part Dhamma book, part memoir. And what interested me about the instinct for freedom pointing was we obviously have appetites. We have the instinct to eat, to sleep. Is it an instinct to breathe? Is it just, what's the difference between instinct and programming? The cellular level of intelligence that animates this space right now, versus a conditioned response, a free choice or a free mindful response. The set of choices that go on for a week or a month, if you're writing a book or a play or a one-woman show, a poem, the deliberate engagement of a deeper choice to actualize an event, an art form, a paper, a doctorate, a marriage, and all the various choices that go along with that co-creative shorter or medium or long-term engagement of choice-making, shaping, sculpting, releasing, all the ways in which we make choices in order to expand or contract, to close, to open. What I'm pointing to here is the experiential Dhamma study of not just energy or the cellular level metaphor, but the inherent wisdom / ignorance within the embeddedness of space-time biology. And how do we determine what to feel, think, assess, release, engage, and what do we empower to determine this is not an event, this is not a thought, an emotion, an event, a person, a time, a vision to follow. Complicated area, but how many times we've, quote, made wrong decisions only to be in clarity in retrospect. And how many of us desire to make wise decisions to fulfill both the immediacy of our own chosen appetite, to fulfill our own chosen destiny, to become more familiar and acquaint ourselves with, who to partner with, who to be a lover with, who to be in meditation with, who to be a client of, who to be a, whatever it is, how do we make these decisions? And I think decision-making, choice-making, destiny feeling, instinctual resonant respect. The respect for the instinct of freedom versus conformity, posing, hoarding, addiction, the loss of choice, and what appears or feels to be the increased intensity of a momentary, hourly, monthly, yearly form of joy that recedes as time goes on, and the repetition of that lack of choice becomes a conditioned habit reaction response, and we find ourselves living more in a despair, a misery, a complexity based upon the inability of absconding, or I should say absconding from wise choice making. What is wise choice making versus destiny and instinct? So I'm just playing here in the serendipity of shared space with you to try to offer some dialogue about a complex area of life. I mean, pause. We're all in the incessant dimension, the perpetual dimension of being compelled by birth to respond, if you will, to our innate proclivities to eat, to walk, to defecate, to bathe, to stay clean, to emote, to culturally study and societally study and linguistically study and psychologically acquaint ourselves with a spiritual dimension. It's forced upon us in a way. I mean, I didn't ask to be born. You didn't ask to be born. Yes, we could kind of attribute it to biology and circumstances and the serendipity of God and the devil, and all of a sudden we find the DNA arising, and all of a sudden you, Carol, Tess, Alan, Marcia, Janine, Martina, Sophie, Mitch, born into this world, and we're compelled to walk, pause, move, pause, stand, pause, sleep, rest, pause. And so how to navigate all this all the time, this instinct for freedom, the deepest proclivity, if you just listen well enough, right? If we listen well enough to the deepest resonance, okay, point here, listening well enough. This is where the spiritual, psychological, dietary, medical, scientific interfaces of sensitivity, health and wealth. If we're not really healthy, it's not easy to listen. If we've got a Novocaine problem, I wanted to say cocaine problem, or we tend to use things to numb choice and to live in the comfortable conditioning of a repetitious habit. And some people want to abscond from choice and the fidelity of choice. Meditation. One of the things I learned early in my meditative life was how out of control I was. Yes, like you, I would get up, I would bathe, I'd read the New York Times, I'd do what I needed to do, I'd walk, talk, paint, read, love, touch, rest, drink, sleep. But when I meditated, and when you are encouraged, if you've got a good Kalyanamita in your life who's somewhat talented at, the issues of interiority and how to study them, meditation, Dhamma. Okay, just right now, just hang, embody, hang, embody. Deep, present time chilling in the feeling of inner beingness, mindfulness in action. And what do you see and feel and know from that experience, Alan? Okay, just let the breath breathe on its own, sit up straight, let the shoulders relax, the head upright. I'm having to speak. Close the mouth, let the tongue relax, keep the eyes open, and just simply feel and allow natural processes to causally unfold in their own lawful nature. In other words, do nothing. Now, if we just sat here in this occupying do-nothing state, what would motivate us to move? And would it be choice, or would it be habit, or would it be conditioning, or would it be instinct, or would it be destiny? Those who've engaged in a meditative retreat environment, or perhaps more intensely in an Asian country, in a meditation center or a monastery, and you've undertaken a week, a month, 2 months, some people go in open-ended, where they follow a schedule of 1 hour sitting, followed by 1 hour of walking, followed by an hour of sitting, by an hour of walking, by 30 minutes of mindful eating, followed by a short rest, followed by an hour of sitting, followed by an hour of walking, an hour of sitting, an hour of walking, an hour of sitting, and hour of walking. And what is the choice that you do in a meditation center? Is to occupy present time presence with mindfulness and be aware of the object when it arises. In the absence of a predominant object, direct your choice-making mindful intelligence to a non-manipulative present arrangement with the feeling of the sensations of the in-breath and the out-breath, the rising of the chest or the rising of the abdomen and the falling of the chest, the collapse of the abdomen, being aware of the systematic nature of non-interfering inhalation, exhalation, natural breathing, not coerced or forced, and just direct choice-making to the phenomena of the sensations of the breathing. Look at all that relaxation of control and choice-making to go somewhere, and you will see, my point here is, you will see and you know that it's very rare to find an individual who can actually choose to be aware of their breath. It's a humbling experience to realize that we are in this embodied biological cognitive package, as it's been satirically labeled, generally a 6-foot skin-draped, ego-driven skeleton of causal conditions and organs and historical particles called karma, making good on the promise of hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, and all of a sudden you realize, I can't sit anymore. When will this end? And you begin to be inhabited, co-opted by thoughts. And where do they come from? You can't control them, being mindful. I don't want to get up. I'm supposed to sit in meditation, thinking. And all of a sudden you move your knee. Next thing you know, you're up walking and you're in your room smoking a cigar or a cigarette or taking a nap. And how did you get there? How did you get to New York? How did you get to Burma? How did you get to Melbourne? How did you get to the coffin? How did you get to the therapist? How did you get into the marriage? How did you get out of the marriage? How did you get into the relationship? How did I get to Kula? How did I get into the boat? How did I study Christianity? How come I didn't get a PhD? How come I'm just about ready to die and I didn't really live the life that I wanted to be living? All based on this instinct for freedom and often a denial of that vocation, right? The instinct for Dhamma realization, the instinct to attain Nibbana, the instinct of all these beautiful tankas in this temple of beautiful love, of a Buddha who was known to be the instinct to follow the passion of a bodhisattva, the vocation of a dedicated artisan, the vocation of a dedicated healer. You know, there's something about the word a dedicated somebody. Means that they have a high fidelity of conviction and courage and navigational skills to maintain a law and order relationship to a deeper impulsion. I have a vision. That's a choice. The carrying out of that vision. The multiplicity of choices. But choice-making doesn't come on its own based upon every choice is a wise one, a good one, a bad one. There are gradations of quality, right? Gradations of insight. a surgeon, although I'm not a surgeon, but I've been around them recently in the last several months. I've had a lot of discussions with surgeons and cardiac nurses, both men and women. And they are uber, super talented in articulating the nuances of, say, a long-term open heart surgery with 10 other high professionals with high technological scientific machinery to keep the patient alive, and meticulously with microscopic lenses looking down into the arteries, the heart itself, and meticulously so-called mending or repairing, and all of a sudden suturing it back up, and all of a sudden the 8, 9, 10, 12 hours of surgery are over. And they made constant choices over the course of 10 hours. They say maybe 100,000 nuanced choices. Isn't that remarkable that we live in such, what's the word? Remarkable pixelation. And one of the things about coming back to meditation is how easy it is for an individual who isn't necessarily sensitive, quiet, or who, what's the word, doesn't cherish, I use the word sparingly, solitude. You can be in the company of people who still empower our solitude because they have maybe you, a high degree of resonant, courageous conviction in the quality of their interior and the quality of their consciousness, the quality of the way in which they listen, the quality in the way in which they interact, and they maintain an evolutional respect for the attributes of wise, Dhamma, intelligent choice-making, even in the company of others. But others live alone, and they live in loneliness, the looping of I'm lonely, I'm lonely. I feel an unrecognizable inability to satiate the need deeper down beyond the loneliness filter loop of how to actualize intimacy and to come out of the despair of I'm alone, I'm alone, I'm alone. It's a thought repetition, right? The lack of choice. Having come so often in my life over the many years to intercept patterns of unrecognized repetitive behavior, whether it be meditating in a particular style, walking in meditation in a particular style, writing in a particular style, mispronouncing a word in a particular style, whatever it may be, and all of a sudden you find yourself becoming more nuanced in the correction of choice. Pause. I was reading here recently in Los Angeles. I mean, there's so many places we can go with this conversation. Just all 8 billion of us right now, come back to what I was going to say, all 8 billion of us right now, in a collective, interrelating, choice-making module. Imagine coordinating 8 billion minds at the nanosecond of the way in which life arises and passes. And is it possible to coordinate these 8 billion plus the non-human world, plus the animation of all the historical intelligence that give rise to consciousness as we know it today in 2021? Is it possible to infiltrate the collective consciousness with a wise choice that guards our future, that protects next year from the calamity of deluded choices, habitual choices, blind choices, pride-driven choices? I mean, isn't that what leadership is about? To understand the role of choice-making and the freedom of choice-making and the wisdom of choice-making for the betterment of the home, the individual, the family, the society, the planet, and the future of life, right? So choice and instinct for freedom and destiny, the articulation of mindfulness to help navigate this precious planet that we're on. So, I mean, I don't know we could say enough about it. And I was recently in Los Angeles, many of you who've been tuning in know, and I decided, I don't have a copy with me, decided to explore a choice that was beleaguering me on an existential human level for the last several years about the possibility of mindfully taking my life as I know it as a human, mindful euthanasia. And so I undertook a many-month personal retreat to explore that type of koan, if you will. Is it appropriate to mindfully, consciously intercept the biological forces of my brain and lungs and heart, to euthanize, to give life to the choice and the rootedness of a choice called the parami choice, the deeper navigational impulsions of consciousness and biology and form and karma to navigate through a dimension into another dimension. Like the UFO today that we've been talking about here at the 3-day gathering. I hope you can check out some of the sessions. Beautiful people here. Beautiful dialogues. And so for these 8-9 months, asking myself, choice, what choice do you want to make with that bigger, discontinuity? Conscious discontinuity is a big choice. But all the little mini choices throughout the hour, throughout the day, sitting in meditation, letting my breathing take place on its own, watching the mind wander, watching the mind becoming more focused, directing the mind when it wandered to be more focused on the breathing, in-breath, out-breath. And I would forget my name, I would forget my location, and all of a sudden it would come back into fidelity. The question would come back. Choice, conscious. Can I navigate consciousness sufficiently enough to elevate up and beyond the questions and the issues and the conditions and the reactions that I was having? And at the end of 9 months, I realized that what I wanted to do was to live more in the heightened, awakened state of deliberate, mindful, conscious engagement of beautifying states of mind, to take myself out of the configuration of a lower altitude question. The answer became one of relaxing the need to keep the dialogue active and to invest in the dimensions of consciousness that took me to a higher sphere that allowed the other issues to relax. I've always believed that to overcome an addiction, increase ones that are more positive, and you'll forget the ones that are less valuable. I became a meditative addict rather than a pharmaceutical addict. I don't use the word meditative addict in a negative sense. I became deliberately engaged in what felt to be the active choice-making of conscious choices of mind. Now, right there, I read the New Yorker cartoon, big book of all the New Yorker cartoons when I was in LA, and there was a man there. And I imagined the cartoon character to be me. He was dressed in Lululemon, and he looked spiritual. And he was poised at a crossroad on the page. And you might have seen this cartoon. It's a little bit of an expansion on the one that's actually in the New Yorker. And there's a sign pointing this way down one road, and it says, "The life you could have led." And this road, this crossroad, had the sign that said, "The life that you'll lead." The life you could have led and the life you'll lead. And there I am, there you are, if you want to put yourself in that kind of dark, spiritual, compelling, satirical cartoon, and you're poised between the, I want to use the word incessant two choices. To study the machinations of consciousness at the crossroads of our momentary lives. Not to get overly burdened by the choices versus destinies versus instincts versus chemistries. But if we're not careful as an individual, we have lived our choices knowingly or unknowingly, and we have to live in the results of that accumulation of journeying down the road of where we are now, not only looking back, but feeling the results of good and bad choices, whether it be talking to a lawyer about how to separate from your long-term partner and, divide up your loot, to, always in retrospect, chemistry seemed like a green light, but perhaps it could have been interpreted as a red light. Life is a succession of crossroads. And here, halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through, just a little bit of a natural serendipity to excite in us a more intimate, wise, I use the word for myself, poetic and aesthetic, a sensitizing, deepening in the sensitivity area of choice making. Do you really need to do what you're going to do, or are you doing it out of habit? I know people who will compulsively, without even being aware of their OCD, speak in repetitive patterns, act in repetitive patterns. I've even been around people for short periods of time and sometimes longer period of times, even nuns and monks in monasteries, where they'll do things repetitively without even being aware of the repetition of the repetitiveness. They'll even, move something every third hour without it ever having been moved from the same spot because of the OCD of an unrecognizable pattern of habit. The way that they wear their robes wrongly, the way that they eat and speak not quite mindfully, and the monk or the nun at the head of the room could hear them overeating. I've been amongst tables where you are compelled to serve your senior around the table rather than taking food. It's a very beautiful etiquette within the monastic form, and sometimes people, based upon the inability to make a wise choice and to respect tradition, will take something out of place, and all of a sudden there's nothing left of that particular curry. And you can see the whole table freeze that monk did something out of habit, out of greed, not out of love, out of freedom, and out of compassion. And so I invite here, are we aware of the concomitant states of consciousness that are shaping and sculpting and supporting us in our decision-making process? Are we aware of patience? Are we aware of the virtue of determination that's coupled with choice that makes it a powerful force in consciousness to stay sustained? I know writing this book, Extinction X-Rated, the title, it was one thing to translate all those notes and eventually turn it into a book, but the navigational skills to stay with it every day, every hour of every day, it's not just sitting in front of a computer writing. You become all consumed in the process of articulating the information on any given page of any given paragraph of every given sentence in a book. I mean, it's a multiplicity of millions of different decisions just simply to deliver the so-called finished product. And so we could just jump time at the end of a life. We look back, how well did I live is going to be how well did I make choices on behalf of what? I know I'm going here and there. It's a complex topic. Maybe I'll continue it tomorrow. I'm not sure if I can make that commitment. But I remember back in the area of northwest Burma, the Karen state, back in 1990. I was there in 1991, and I met a gentleman, an American former vet, a volunteer who did numerous tours in Vietnam and was a highly trained combatant, a pretty brilliant mind, a brilliant writer, a brilliant friend. He's now gone, passed away. But we met in the jungle, and without getting into the intensity of that, but one day we were hanging out and talking before going out to the front lines, and he, who's highly trained in the vibrational frequencies of extreme conflict, he can hear, he can smell, he can intuit in ways that I'm just not trained as a non-combatant, and being there really primarily as an observer and journalist. But he was living out there full-time. And he looked at me and he said, "We're under attack." I said, "Really?" And he looked straight up and it said, "Jets directly above. Blocked by the sun, I can hear them." And suddenly I began to hear them, and I immediately, instinctually, for whatever reason, is it fight or flight, something like that, I decided to abscond from where we were hanging. Run was the instinct for freedom. And he just grabbed my arm and looked at me right in the eye and said, in the briefest statement, when you're under jet rocket attack, there is no place to hide. Not here anyway. It's all wood. The further away from the wood we are, the less likely we'll be splintered to death. And I just immediately, what's the word? Froze, thawed, became excited, terrified, grounded, empowered, simultaneity in action with the wisdom of a man who had been in complex circumstances. And he looked at me and said, "There's nowhere to run. The choice, nowhere to go." This is a very deeply meditative position. You can't escape the earth no matter what you do, right? Therein lies the deep instinct for freedom to transcend what they call the Lokiya Dhammas, good and bad, right and wrong, love and hate, war and peace, through cognitive transformation. The Eastern philosophies of enlightenment are about the conscious vocation of choosing a long-term curriculum of escaping the invenerating conditions of life on the planet in ordinary experience. Wow, that's a very high fidelity choice at the crossroads of our lives. How do I ever come to something that's a pre-instinct of freedom? The wisdom of wisdom, the choice to engage nibbana or liberation. And I beg of you to remind me, to remind you and our friends, let's write down in our journals, across the terrain of our heart, our passions, our momentary pause. We all meditate, we all do yoga to stay healthy and nimble. We eat the right food, but do we make the right choices in life? Are we living out of habit, out of convenience? It's not black or white. How well are we choosing the life that we want? Is a little bit cliched. How well are we choosing the states of consciousness. Every brushstroke into the paint is a choice. Every comma, every period, every semicolon, every letter, every intonation, every pause, every touch, every kiss, every moment of listening, every page that's turned, every finger that presses the keyboard in a text. Look at all the memory that goes into just writing a text. Look at all the deep, 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 deep commitment and connectivity that goes with eating a meal. The intelligences in the body. So I ask the question, how free are your choices, Alan? How guided are they by what? Write them down. What do you want your choices to be guarded by, shaped by? How do I understand the wisdom of when to walk, when to stay, when to listen, when to talk, when to sit, what to do when I sit, what to listen to, what to read, when to close the book, when to drive on? How well did we live our lives this week, this month? How well did I engage this 10-day retreat? How well did I walk upon planet Mother Earth? How well did I participate in the well-being of others? Pause. Perhaps the most difficult area of decision is tending to the highest aspirations of the human heart called you. Never too late to make good on the promise of the integrity of a vision. Never too late, I say to myself and people and to my beloved, never too late, always on time to make good on the promise of manifesting your art on the terms of your innovative risk-making, whatever it may be, on the palette, on the keyboard, on the canvas, on the stage of your own truth-telling heart. Spontaneity, improvisational intimacy, deep, conscious, mindful flow in the dance. We all want to make choices where there's a high, elegant stream of mutuality. To me, that's a heightened form of choice. Are you making choices to come out of the habit of your isolation, Alan? Are you making choices to understand the healing power of the feminine, the instinctual intimate, the high risk to be more present with beautiful states of mind, to cut the looping of negative, familiar patterns of judgment and blame that often go into the realm of comedic satire? Can you be in joy rather than in almost joy? Right? How well can you eat? How well can you put that fork down and no longer choose to eat the food that doesn't serve the heart? So many choices. There's so many things that we could do. You can own a house but live as if it's a dungeon. You can fly in a plane but fear that it's an old worn out car and it's a Lear jet. How often I've heard from teachers and friends and poems, you can live in the best house and home and castle in the world, but unless you occupy with wise choice the liberty and the stature and the dignity of the human heart, you could live in fear, in fire, in contempt, in claustrophobia, with all the windows open, with the finest music, and you still don't have the fine spiritual Dhamma art of making wise choices to release habit, to increase the freedom to breathe freely, in breath, out breath. the complexity of choices. Well, my friend, way out there in the Corinne state under rocket fire, he said, there's nowhere to run. He took out a cigarette, put it up, lit it, classic moment of a film, and we hung out for those timeless few minutes, smoking, and he had the ethical courage to actually empower an intimate discussion. There we were, brief as it may have been, brief as it was, excuse me, under rocket attack by the Burmese military army with Russian planes. And it was a terrifying awakening to see how you can save your life and what you can do in the middle of terror and complexity. I'll close here. I've said this so much, but I'll never stop saying it. And so much of the delight in the horror of my last 10 years has been primarily in the country of Myanmar, in Burma, a culture that many of you know I adore, that's under siege right now by a terrorist organization known as SAC, Masak, Ming Online, the former general turned terrorist, and his Boko Haram, his Khmer Rouge known as SAC, S-A-C, State Administration Council, the acronym MASAC. The people are under siege, and they're empowering courageous choice, following that instinct for freedom that includes the freedom of others as inseparable from the freedom of their own. Those are hyper complex choices, I would assume. I never felt happier until I left Western culture and found myself with a shaven head in a monastery. I was liberated through that choice. And later on, going to areas of extreme war and conflict, I felt liberated by these choices to be in the vicinity, to listen and to learn what it meant to live closer to the earth, closer to the heart. I needed that. I needed those experiences. But in prisons, those 10 years of study in Burma with political prisoners, you can't move your body, Alan. Even in a prison cell designed for 3 people, that's super small, we put 5, 7, 8 people in there. Being meticulously aware over the many years of having to rotate, to stand, to lie down, to sleep, to answer the call of nature in the bucket in the room that doesn't get relieved but once every second or third, fourth or fifth day. The confinement of body, but the non-confinement of choice. Choice under pressure. Choice under complex conditions. I keep wanting at times to make choices that give me more luxury, more safety, more hope, more time, more future, more love, more intimacy, the delight of being on the stage set, of actualizing desires and them being fulfilled rather than renunciation of desire and the joy of the silence of release. Very interesting dynamic studying the physics of consciousness. But in the prison cell, in the interviews that I did, the choice, and I'll end here, the choice, Alan, to know and to feel but let me say it this way. I interviewed one man. I've written about it, in short. I called it the black cell. He was a physicist. Intellectuals were rounded up in Burma and put in prison. He was stripped of his clothing, interrogated violently, and put into a small cell where he wasn't even able to lie down. And there were no windows, he told me. And so he learned how to shift himself in a kneeling position, in a leaning position. The idea of being confined like that and to empower liberating choice under that level of restraint is epic, fair enough. And because there was no ventilation, he said he often kept his face and his nose close to the little holes and window where the food would be put in and where he would leave it to have it taken out. At first, he told me, he was in incredible contempt for being incarcerated and tortured and lost all control, all freedom, all happiness. He said, in very succinct terms, the bleakness of that was indescribable. But he said to me, in short, I could talk about this for about 20 minutes, but I'll only do it for 2. He said, but being trained as a physicist, I was trained in independent thinking, deep reasoning, inquiry, and causality, a universe of interrelated conditions. And I began to use my mind, he said, reflectively on my circumstances. Somewhat paraphrased. I wrote about this in my book, A Future to Believe in. Not sure which of the chapters. I began to employ reflective reasoning and determined that the dictator and those loyal to the dictator were indoctrinated and had no control of their own consciousness, their own faculties. A causal interrelatedness that resulted in evil behaviors, torture, incarceration, desecration, genocide. We know that. Conditions, rather than someone doing something to me. And he said to me that inevitably, as all humans, they were born through the womb of the woman. And slowly, over the minutes, hours, months, and years of their lives, were shaped and sculpted and conditioned by parents, by relatives, by food, by religion, conditions, shaping them to no longer have a voice, a choice of consciousness within their own consciousness, fully conditioned, indoctrinated to eventually become the dictator and the men and the women who are sufficiently indoctrinated to do the evil actions told of them to do to, in this case, the physicist, incarcerated in the black cell without windows, reflecting on the horror of his circumstances and how to consciously extricate himself from his own self-generated horror. Radical form of choice-making. He began to extrapolate, he said, that just as the dictator and the men in the military and the police forces and the cronies in the country that were conditioned and co-opted or in collusion with the dictator, he began to expand this reflection to include all life on the planet, all beings, conditioned by forces that give rise to choices that we know right now are going on simultaneously around the planet, with you and me being just 1 to 50, 100 consciousnesses within the 8 billion, navigating, denying, elevating, torturing, either knowingly or unknowingly, in our own chosen areas of consciousness on who and what we do and who we relate to. How could we ever navigate this planet Earth and to save our souls unless we empower the wisdom of mindful choice making and take it to a high leadership level where the qualities of love and compassion, sacredness and sanctity and trust and mutuality are empowered over evil, desecration, xenophobia, discrimination, privilege and profit, and weapons and war. All about choice making, right? And he began to extrapolate, he told me, that all of the world as he understood it through the reflection, through his training of physics, was conditions based upon conditions without central source. Even my reaction, he said, to the evil was a conditioned response. He said to me, I have an ability to make a choice that relieves me from the entanglement of feeling a victim. Takes pretty dark moments for all of us sometimes to realize, here I am at the precipice of the light, at the edge of the world. All of us are mortal. Why do we need a heavenly messenger, a diagnosis, a prognosis of imminent fatality, an extinction, to generate higher passion for more reasoned, more liberating qualities of choice-making, presence, and navigating an hour, a week, a month on the terms of our integrity, our dignity, our enlightenment beyond the fatigue of the propaganda, of the wars of information. Where's our instinct for freedom, and how do we embrace and illuminate the sky? So at the end of a life, today, tomorrow, this very moment, we could all die. I could die, you could die. How well did we live is about how well did we make choices. And he finally told me after a few minutes, I walked myself right back into everything was a conscious or unconscious choice. I am the one who can choose my destiny. I can choose the way I feel or react or non-react to anything whatsoever. Yes, there's a biological, chemical, DNA, existential root. Who knows how ultimately conditioned or free choice is or isn't really. But I got as close to the political prisoner as I could and talked in the most compassionate way that I could be, that I could manifest. What is choice like under those conditions? And at the end of the communication with this gentleman, he said, I learned how to make my black cell my heaven. He looked at me with the brightest, most beautiful smile and said, who would ever have imagined that I would find my happiness in a dark prison cell? I'm with my friend under rocket attack. I'm faced with what's been told to me, a potentially fatal heart illness or condition. My study points to the collapse of the environment. There's rumors going around now through various sources and intel that there'll be an imminent, massive cyber attack on the digital electrical grid coming up at the end of the month, where that information is coming from. But we're in and under attack. We're all, in a way, with this sixth mass extinction. In a type of spherical prison cell without walls, except a 7-mile-high area of photonic illumination confined in an oxygen belt where we see based upon photons and light. A conditioned world, compelled at the crossroads of consciousness and context in any given moment of our senses to make choice. Mindfulness is about the wisdom of choice to see, to feel, to release conflict, and to elevate the status of the good, the true, and the beautiful. My way of encouraging you to encourage me. Thank you for being in my life, just simply playing here in this shared field this morning as I embark upon another hour, another minute, another day, God willing, of walking as softly and here in this island, driving a lot, to destinations of intimacy and love and friendship. So many beautiful people here, caretaking the preciousness of this little island in a strange world today with powers of totalitarianism and imminent collapse and struggle and financial overboard and minds that have gone crazy and haywire with pharmaceuticals and drugs and loneliness. And here we find ourselves playing in this sonic digital dance called samsara in 2021. And I ask you, sister, to ask me, brother, what will you do to make good on the promise of your consciousness while there is time and health to make a choice to fulfill your psychic, existential, human raison d'etre? What will you leave behind, young woman, for a boy or a girl or a squirrel or a bird or an alien or a goddess, a worm, a butterfly, a fish, a molecule, whatever intelligence may be in any form? What will we leave behind for the betterment of life? Stories. Our life is a story, a narration of cognitive, emotional, existential, physical, blood, pus, a cognitive, physical, wrapped mystery. What will you do? Where's your art? Where's your heart? Not the physical one. Where's that fire in your belly, as it was said? Where's your passion? Where's the choice to increase the love affair with the visionary in you? Take time. Stop the low dosing. Stop the meditating and talk to yourself in the deepest way of choice-making, intimacy with the deepest instincts for freedom, right? I'm at the precipice of death, as you are. I'm not concerned necessarily with eating the strawberry, having fallen over the cliff and hanging down with one arm on a branch, with the tiger ready to bite my body and go, oh my ha, so sweet. There's something more to the story than just tasting the sweetness and something. Yes, yes, yes. Cut it right back to the moment, right? In breath, out breath, neither wish to live nor fear dying. How well do you drink? How well do you walk? How well do you really, really, really wash your face and brush your teeth? Don't race into the narrative of habit to go to bed, to wake up, to reacquaint yourself with blind habits, to no longer finish your book, your art, your love. I don't want to play any more here except may you find that love, that passion, that joy, that fire. Make magic. Write that one-woman play. Learn every word of it so well that it's spontaneous, that it's being done on the stage of Broadway, right up there with Springsteen. And you are going to obliterate your fear, your conditions of hesitation, stop anointing ourselves with old worn-out narratives of healing and curations and shadows and struggles. Throw off the dysfunction. Love your flaws. Learn to make a choice to inhabit the wholeness without the need to remove. Include. Be a breathtaking star lighting up the sky of your own heart and universe, right? What will you do? Deep choices, medium choices, microscopic choices, visionary choices, dream-oriented choices, metaphorical choices. The caterpillar moving through the DNA of the choice up the branch, into the cocoon, into the butterfly, into the post-butterfly, into the angel, into the Brahma, into the Avalokiteshvara, into the Bodhisattva, into the Buddha, in you, in me. What's at the center of your heart, Alan? And how will you kiss, anoint, and live in the poetry of actualization, choice, and to actualize on the promise of our lives? It will soon be gone. The courage to care about things larger than your own self-interest. Choice is not just about yourself, right? How well will you give today? How well will you love today? How well will you tell people that you care? How well will you forgive yourself for your inability to criticize and to judge? How well will you elevate redemption? What's your star? What's your enlightenment? Make good on the promise of choice. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. God willing, see you tomorrow, 9:30 from Maui. Thank you.